far as I'm concerned, Colin Kaepernick is absolutely irrelevant. My days of rooting for him have come to an end. He comes across as a flaming hypocrite. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not interested in a damn word that he has to say. Having the audacity to kneel for the national anthem, talking about how you won't stop until there is change that take place, to turn around and not to even take your behind to the polls to vote? How pathetic can you be? It is ignorant, it is weak, it is shameful, and more importantly, is it a disrespect to our ancestors? Matter of fact, I would personally make a request to the media in this nation, wherever he is, if he ain't on that football field trying to throw another damn incomplete pass, do me a favor and make sure one thing: take the camera away from him.
That was yesterday. Stephen A. did not hold back in his disappointment in Colin Kaepernick for not voting after Kaepernick's national anthem protest sparked national debate. Here's what Colin had to say about why he chose not to vote in this election. Quote, "I've been very disconnected from the systematic oppression as a whole, so for me, it's another face that's going to be the face of that system of oppression. And to me, it didn't really matter who went in there. The system still remains intact that oppresses people of color." Stephen A., now that you've heard from Colin in his explanation, do you feel differently towards him?
No, not at all. I still think he's a flaming hypocrite. I still think that he deserves every level of vitriol I aimed in his direction. Yesterday, I'm not holding back one bit. The only regret that I have, based on my diatribe from yesterday, is that I did not add the word selfish to the equation, because he was that too. See, Colin Kaepernick's thinking about himself. Colin Kaepernick ain't thinking about oppressed people. Because if you were thinking about oppressed people, you wouldn't just take that position. You understand? You would make sure that you're doing what you could. Voting is a part of it. There is nothing in this country that has ever been accomplished without folks going to the polls to make sure their voice was heard. That's point number one. Point number two, from a historical perspective, there are people who have fought, who have bled, who have died for him to have the right to even protest without severe ramifications, I might add. He seems to have forgotten that. But more importantly than anything else, you have to remember, when you kneeled, okay, you essentially brought the attention of a national microscope in your direction. You said that you were honored to have done it because you wanted to affect the lives of other people. Well, you might be fine with taking a position that you don't want to vote and what have you, while collecting $12 million that you don't deserve, by the way. But then you turn around and you publicize to the world that you didn't vote. If you were trying to have an impact and you're trying to influence the lives of the many, then you understand how egregious it is that you then turned around and announced to the world that you didn't vote. So essentially, you're encouraging other individuals, particularly of a younger generation, to play no part, no role in the voting process whatsoever. The great coach Doc Rivers, a champion with the Boston Celtics, the coach and the GMs for the Los Angeles Clippers, just a phenomenal coach and a phenomenal human being with this whole Trump-Hillary process going on. What did Doc Rivers say in the aftermath of all of that? It was a little bit different than Stan Van Gundy. It was a little bit different than Steve Kerr. What he said was what irritated him the most were the individuals who didn't activate themselves in this election by choosing not to vote. In the case of Colin Kaepernick, it elevates exponentially. Why? Because you didn't just not vote. You had the audacity to sit up there and announce it to the world as if you were encouraging the youth who you encouraged to begin with not to activate themselves and go out to vote. So while you ultimately will end up being okay because you're collecting $12 million that you don't deserve with your 0-3 self, completing just 52% of your passes, can't win a damn football game, you've been irrelevant as a quarterback for about 3 years now, you're gonna be all right. But those youngsters on the come up, that are looking to activate themselves somehow, some way to make sure they can have a profound impact on the system. They don't get to do that because an individual like you is so caught up on the evil you're convinced that exists so profoundly that you don't even want to take part in a political process where you're going to be just fine because you've been able to pocket millions. But those on the come up who will need to activate themselves to make sure they can create and provoke change, you've just encouraged them not to do it. It is egregious, it is irresponsible, it is weak, it is pathetic, it is hypocritical, and it is selfish. And that is exactly what Colin Kaepernick was in this particular situation. I ain't backing up one damn bit. I said it, I meant it. Period.
Max.
Not only am I not backing up, I want to take it further now because Stephen A. just now and both of us yesterday talked philosophically about how you have to make a choice. You have to weigh the evidence, weigh what's in front of you, and make a choice, even if you feel like the choice is suboptimal. Because if you're waiting for everything to be perfect, it's the enemy of the good. The perfect is the enemy of the good. Just make the best choice you can. If it means incremental change, fine, whatever. But we spoke broadly philosophically about this. Now I want to talk specifically about, because Colin Kaepernick, I'm angry about it, is so outrageous. The only thing I can think is that he is susceptible to low-quality information. You know, the internet means we have a lot of information, but if you don't have the faculties, if you don't have the ability to process it and sift out what's good quality information from low quality information, you are susceptible to the kind of conclusions Colin Kaepernick has drawn. Let me be specific. He says systematic oppression of I guess, black and brown lives, right? That's what he was protesting. And that neither the candidates are the same, essentially, in that sense. It's idiotic. That is idiotic. Now, look, let me go through the list. You care about black and brown lives? What do you think about stop and frisk, which was found to be unconstitutional? How do you think that has an effect on the way police and the communities they interact with? What kind of outcomes do you expect from practices that are considered unconstitutional? Remember stop and frisk in New York City? Rudy Giuliani, he might be the head of the Department of Justice. What kind of outcomes are you expecting then? How about this? Forget about the Supreme Court for a second, which has a tremendous influence on issues like this. For example, illegal search and seizure. I mean, they make those rules, and that has a direct effect on the policing of communities. Now, if Kaepernick feels like, hey, harsher law and order rules are actually good for people of color, okay, fine, then you vote one way. If you think, no, it makes bad outcomes, then you vote another. But it's more, and it's deeper than that. The president also appoints lower federal judges who have great discretion in terms of sentencing guidelines. How about this? Because Jason Whitlock brings this up a lot. If you're talking about black and brown lives matter, in fact, interaction with police is not nearly as important as mass incarceration, which this election will also have an enormous impact on. For example, drug laws. I brought up search and seizure. I brought up all these other drug laws. They're finally starting to untangle the drug laws through the court, which will alleviate the problem over time of mass incarceration. If that gets all stitched back together, which, based on who Trump is likely to appoint versus who Hillary was likely to appoint, it likely will get stitched back together. What do you think is going to happen to mass incarceration of black and brown folk? I mean, the idea that he treats both candidates the same because of systematic oppression as though they will have no effect on the system is so juvenile. It's either juvenile or extremely lazy. Shame on you, Colin Kaepernick. You know, smarten up, kid. He's not a college player. He's an adult, and he talks about how he's becoming socially conscious and he's getting his eyes open. Open them a little bit wider. How about this? Google it. It takes 5 seconds. How hard is this stuff? It is outrageous for him to make those comments.
Not only is it outrageous, but it's ignorant and selfish, like you said. It's ignorant for all the reasons that you pointed out, but it's also selfish because he was clearly thinking about himself instead of the lives that he purportedly was interested in impacting when he took the stance that he took. So we have to take that into consideration. And oh, by the way, Max, you know what? Of all the things that you said, there's one thing that you didn't bring up. Hillary Rodham Clinton and Donald Trump weren't the only presidential candidates.
Right. Well, they were, in fact.
Gary Johnson.
They were, in fact.
Well, I'm just saying,
one or the other was going to get elected.
I'm just saying, you go. That's true, but you could have gone to the polls.
Sure, Jill
and
Stein.
refused to vote for them by voting for Jill Stein or voting for Gary Johnson. You could have done that. It wasn't going to get you anywhere, but at least you would have exercised the right that people fought, bled, and died for you to have. That's the point in all of this. And it's one thing, it's bad enough not to vote, but to then sit there and to tell the world that you didn't vote after taking the stance that you took and essentially contributing to further dividing this nation during an election year where they were already divided. This is one of the things that nobody has brought up, but I'm going to bring it up right here on First Take. When you think about those folks, and we talk about folks activating themselves in an election, Max, haven't y'all found yourselves, Max Molly, at some point in time or another, even though you were going to vote anyway, even though you had a position and there was a stance that you were going to take anyway, you found yourself further incentivized by things that may have happened in moments, whether it's weeks, days, hours, or whatever the case may be, leading up to an election? When you think about Colin Kaepernick taking a kneel for the national anthem, and you thought about how a segment of our populace took that, okay, and how they reacted to that, it literally became a discussion. I was on Good Morning America about 3 or 4 times talking about this issue. The national television shows, the networks, radio airwaves, and beyond. This was a story that everyone was fixed upon for weeks. You're trying to tell me that these are those kind of thoughts never entered anybody's mind when they ultimately went to the polls, thinking about the kind of folks who were supporting Colin Kaepernick and the kind of folks who were against Colin Kaepernick, and then attaching that to Trump or Hillary Clinton and deciding once again that may influence them themselves. This is not a small issue. So for Colin Kaepernick to come out and to announce to the world that he ain't voting, you understand, it was completely hypocritical, irresponsible, and selfish, because all he was thinking about was himself.
Sure, we're talking about principle here, and I want to talk to Kaepernick directly about the specifics. That's why I brought up illegal search and seizure, stop and frisk, who's likely to be the head of the Department of Justice, Supreme Court justices, lower federal court justices, sentencing guidelines. I mean, it's been proven, by the way, I mean, this is statistical fact, that for the same crime, black and brown people are sentenced much more harshly than non-black or than white people, right? So what kind of federal judges do you think are going to be appointed by one administration or the other? Cap, it takes a little bit of research. You have to do it. Look how excited the private prison industry was when Trump got elected. Private prisons, an outrage in modern life. Or maybe Kaepernick thinks, no, privatize prisons. That's a good idea. The point is, you have to find out about the idea that that both candidates represented the same thing in terms of systematic oppression of black and brown lives is so ignorant it defies description. And this is coming from someone who supported Kaepernick by and large in his protest. I didn't support him wearing the Castro shirt or the socks with the police depicted as pigs, but in every other instance, I supported him. I said, good for him. He's being brave. He's being smart. But this is the opposite of that.
By the way, Max, the private prison system that you brought up, did you know that the stock market has climbed over the last 24 hours or so just because of that?
Yep.
Just because of that.
Yeah, people are investing in
what that means, Colin Kaepernick, people are investing in the prison system. They think they can profit off of it, and as a result, it's buffered our stock market to some degree. But Colin Kaepernick, oh no, I mean, voting's not going to make any difference whatsoever.
That's also connected to the drug laws and to mass incarceration and to outcomes of policing of communities. So Colin Kaepernick, is there really no difference on the impact of black and brown lives dependent on the outcome of this election? Are you kidding? Do you not own a computer? Do you have no one to talk to? Can you read a book? Do you know how to vet information? It's an outrage.
And clearly he's misguided, has a lot more research and education he needs. I'd love if someone like you could sit down with him, Max.
Selfish.
It would be great. I'd love if you had a sit-down interview with someone like him and further this conversation. Yeah, it's selfish, it's ignorant, and...
I would absolutely be open to that.
And he needs to delve much deeper into these issues because it feels like it's very surface, his knowledge on them.